The mockery. The Galactic Empire had ruled over 300 star systems for 12 millennia. Their crystalline ships moved through space like predators through dark water, and their presence at any world's doorstep meant only one thing: submission or annihilation. They had never lost a war, never retreated from a battle, and never considered any species their equal. The Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Empire, a being whose crystalline form stood 4 meters tall and radiated a cold blue light, descended from the central platform. Each movement sent refractions of light dancing across the chamber's walls. When the Chancellor spoke, its voice resonated like breaking glass and distant thunder. "Behold the representative of Earth," the Chancellor announced, gesturing toward Reed with one translucent appendage. "They call themselves humanity. They inhabit a single star system on the edge of civilized space. Their technology is primitive, their ships are slow, and their bodies are fragile." A sound like wind chimes filled the chamber, Calexian laughter. "They refused our generous offer of protectorate status. They actually believed they could remain independent." Reed remained silent, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. He had been an ambassador for 43 years, had negotiated treaties with 12 different species, and had learned that sometimes the most powerful statement was no statement at all. The Chancellor circled him, its massive form casting shifting shadows. "Look at their representative. Old, weak breathing labored in our superior atmosphere. His species lives for barely 100 cycles. They are made of soft flesh and brittle bone. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no remarkable abilities. They are in every measurable way inferior." More laughter rippled through the assembled Calexians. Even some of the subjugated species joined in, either from genuine amusement or from fear of not showing proper appreciation for their master's humor. A younger Calexian commander stepped forward, its form a deeper blue than the Chancellor's. "Supreme Chancellor, perhaps we should simply end this farce. One human system will fall within days. Their population of 11 billion is nothing compared to our trillions. Why waste time with this? Ceremony?" The Chancellor's form brightened with amusement. "Because, Commander Zarak's, examples must be made. The galaxy must see what happens to those who refuse the Empire's protection, and what better example than this frail creature and its deluded species?" The Chancellor turned back to Reed. "Tell us, human, what could your species possibly offer as defense? Your fastest ships would take months to reach our nearest outpost. Your weapons are kinetic projectiles and primitive nuclear devices. You have no energy shields, no plasma artillery, no quantum torpedoes. What makes you think you can survive even a single day against the Calexian fleet?" Finally, Reed spoke. His voice was quiet but carried clearly through the chamber's perfect acoustics. "You're right about our technology. You're right about our ships. You're right that we're made of flesh and bone." He paused, meeting the Chancellor's multifaceted gaze. "But you're wrong about everything else." The laughter stopped. The chamber fell silent. Reed continued, his voice gaining strength. "You've conquered species that evolved in peace. Beings that developed technology for exploration and communication. Civilizations that saw war as an aberration, something to be avoided." He looked around the chamber at the subjugated species. Every species here developed beyond their violent phase before reaching the stars. They had to. It's the natural progression of intelligent life. But humans, Reed smiled, and something in that expression made Commander Zarak step back. "We never stopped being violent. We just got better at controlling it. We reached the stars not despite our nature, but because of it. We weaponized atomic energy not for power generation, but for war. The power plants came later. We developed computers not for calculation, but for targeting. Every one of our innovations, every technological breakthrough was either created for war or immediately adapted for it." The Chancellor's form flickered with irritation. "Empty boast from a dying species. You think our ships are slow?" Reed continued as if the Chancellor hadn't spoken. "You're right. But we don't need fast ships when we've spent the last century seeding the space between stars with weapons that have been dormant, waiting. You think our bodies are weak? You're right. But we've spent 50,000 years learning to use tools, weapons, and strategies that make physical strength irrelevant. You think we're inferior because we only inhabit one system?" Reed's smile widened. "That's because we've been preparing it. Every asteroid, every moon, every piece of space debris larger than a meter has been weaponized. Our entire system is a fortress," Commander Zarak laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Impossible. Our scouts have scanned your system thoroughly. We detected no significant military installations. That's because you were looking for your kind of weapons, Reed replied. You were looking for energy signatures, massive constructions, traditional military buildup. You weren't looking for what humans are actually good at. He paused. We're persistence predators, Chancellor. Our ancestors hunted by outlasting their prey, by being relentless, by never giving up, and we've turned that evolutionary trait into a military doctrine. The Chancellor descended from its platform until it loomed directly over Reed. You dare threaten the Galaxian Empire? No, Reed said calmly. I'm trying to warn you. My capture, this ceremony, it's all being transmitted to Earth. Right now, my people are watching. They're seeing their ambassador being humiliated. They're hearing your mockery, and they're making a decision. His voice dropped lower. You want to know what makes humanity dangerous? It's not our technology or our numbers. It's that we've been fighting each other for our entire existence. We've perfected war against an enemy that thinks like us, that adapts like us, that refuses to die like us. We've learned to fight enemies that know all our weaknesses because they share them. The entire chamber was silent now. Even the subjugated species leaned forward, sensing something shifting in the atmosphere. We tried to be peaceful, Reed continued. We sent diplomats instead of warships. We offered trade instead of threats. We wanted to join the galactic community as friends. His expression hardened. But you've made it clear that friendship isn't possible. You've shown us that this galaxy only respects force. So let me tell you what happens next. The Chancellor's form pulsed with anger. You dare to dictate terms? You are our prisoner. Your world is defenseless. No, Reed said. I'm your messenger. And my message is this. Humanity has been preparing for this moment since we first detected signals from other civilizations. We hoped for peace, but we prepared for war. Every human knows the protocols. Every citizen has been trained. Every resource has been allocated. We call it the Fortress Doctrine, and it's very simple. If we can't explore the stars in peace, then no one will explore them at all. Empty threats. Commander Zerax scoffed. What can one species do against an empire? Reed looked directly at him. Ask yourself this, Commander. If we're so weak, so inferior, why did you need to bring your entire Third Fleet to capture one diplomatic vessel? Why did it take 40 of your best warriors to subdue a single old human? Why are your scouts reporting unusual energy readings from the Sol system that match no known weapon signatures? The commander's form flickered uncertainly. As the guards moved to escort Reed away, he spoke one last time, loud enough for everyone to hear. You know what the difference is between you and us, Chancellor? You've forgotten what it means to fight for survival. You've been the apex predator for so long, you've forgotten that even apex predators can become prey. He looked around the chamber one final time. Humanity remembers. We remember what it's like to be hunted, to be desperate, to have nothing left to lose. And there's nothing more dangerous than a species with nothing left to lose. The guards dragged him from the chamber, but his words lingered. The subjugated species exchanged glances, seeing something they hadn't seen in millennia. Uncertainty in Galaxian eyes. The awakening. The message from Galexis Prime reached Earth in 17 hours, transmitted through quantum relays that the Galaxians had graciously allowed humanity to access. They wanted Earth to see their ambassador's humiliation immediately, to understand their helplessness, to despair before the first ships even arrived. In the underground command center beneath Mount Cheyenne, General Patricia Chen watched the recording for the third time. Around her, the Joint Chiefs of Staff stood in silence, their faces grim but not defeated. When the recording ended, Chen turned to face them. Phoenix Protocol is now active, she said simply. May God forgive us for what we're about to do. Across Earth, a transformation began that had been rehearsed in secret for decades. In cities around the globe, buildings that had stood as monuments to peace revealed their true nature. The United Nations headquarters in New York, rebuilt after the last Great War, split open to reveal a massive quantum transmitter. Museums that had housed remnants of humanity's violent past activated hidden systems, their exhibits of ancient weapons providing templates for mass production. Hospitals engaged emergency protocols, their peaceful medical equipment reconfiguring into battlefield surgical units. But the real awakening happened in orbit. What the Galaxians had dismissed as primitive satellites and outdated space stations began to change. Solar panels unfolded into weapon arrays. Communication satellites revealed themselves as camouflaged missile platforms. The International Space Station, humanity's symbol of cooperation, shed its scientific modules like a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis, revealing the warship at its core. Captain David Kim stood on the bridge of what had been, moments before, the ISS. Now it was the EWS Resilience, humanity's first true warship, hidden in plain sight for 30 years. His crew, who had posed as scientists and researchers, took their real positions with practiced efficiency. "All systems nominal, Captain," his executive officer reported. "The sheep's clothing is off. The wolf is ready to hunt," Kim nodded. "Send the activation signal to all dormant platforms. It's time to show them what humans do when cornered." Throughout the solar system, humanity's true preparations revealed themselves. The mining operations in the asteroid belt had never been about resources. They had hollowed out asteroids and turned them into kinetic weapons. The research stations on Mars weren't studying the planet's geology. They were underground factories producing weapons banned by every civilized species. The deep space monitoring stations weren't looking for asteroids. They were coordination centers for the most extensive minefield ever created. On Earth, the transformation was even more dramatic. Every able-bodied human between the ages of 18 and 60 had undergone basic military training under the guise of civil emergency preparation. Now, 12 billion humans reported to their designated positions. Factories that had produced consumer goods switched to military production without missing a beat. They had been designed for this purpose from the beginning. In Beijing, Moscow, Washington, London, Delhi, and 100 other cities, leaders who had pretended to argue and compete for decades revealed the truth. Every conflict, every disagreement had been theater, maintaining the illusion of a divided humanity while secretly preparing for this exact moment. President Sarah Martinez addressed the world from the transformed UN building. Behind her, the flags of all nations had been replaced with a single banner, Earth United. "Citizens of Earth," she began, her voice carrying to every device on the planet. "The moment we have prepared for has arrived. An alien empire has taken our ambassador and declared their intention to enslave us. They mock our weakness. They laugh at our technology. They expect us to surrender." She paused, her expression hardening. "They have forgotten that we are the children of those who survived ice ages with stone tools. We are the descendants of those who crossed oceans on wooden rafts. We are the inheritors of those who split the atom while calculating with slide rules. We are humanity and we do not surrender." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across Earth, 12 billion voices rose in a single word: Phoenix. It was the activation code, the signal that every human had been taught from childhood. The Phoenix Protocol, humanity's plan to rise from its own ashes if threatened with extinction. 3 days later, the first Calexian scout ships entered the solar system. Commander Xerax himself led the reconnaissance mission, wanting to personally witness Earth's fear before the main fleet arrived. What he found defied everything he believed possible. "Commander," his sensor officer's voice trembled with confusion. "I'm reading. This can't be correct." "Report," Xerax ordered. "The entire inner system is active. Energy signatures everywhere, millions of them. But they match no known weapon patterns. They're primitive, but there are so many." Xerax studied the displays. Where there should have been a helpless system with a few defensive platforms, he saw something that made no sense. Every asteroid larger than 100 meters was moving, powered by crude but effective engines. They weren't just rocks, they were guided missiles, each one capable of devastating kinetic impact. The space between planets was filled with devices that barely registered on sensors. Primitive mines using chemical explosives and radiation, invisible until triggered. "How many ships are you detecting?" Xerax asked. "That's just it, Commander. These aren't ships in any conventional sense. They're everything. They've weaponized everything. Civilian transports, cargo vessels, even their space stations. They've turned their entire civilization into a weapon." A transmission cut through their confusion. It was audio only, but Xerax recognized the voice. It was the old human from the ceremony, Ambassador Reed. "Commander Xerax." Reed's voice was calm, almost conversational. "I know you're monitoring this frequency. I'm transmitting from my cell on Calexis Prime. Yes, we manage that much with your superior technology. I wanted you to understand what you're seeing. Every human has been preparing for this moment their entire life. We call it the Phoenix Protocol because we're willing to burn everything we've built to ensure we rise again. Your empire conquers by making species choose between submission and destruction. But humans? We choose neither. We choose mutual annihilation. Xerax's form flickered with anger. You would destroy yourselves rather than submit? Oh, Commander. Reed's voice carried a hint of amusement. We've nearly destroyed ourselves hundreds of times just over ideology and resources. Do you really think we'd hesitate to do it to remain free? But here's the thing, we won't just destroy ourselves. We'll take you with us. Every ship that enters our system will face not a fleet, but a civilization that has turned itself into a weapon. Every human is a soldier. Every tool is a weapon. Every breath we take is an act of defiance. Impossible, Xerax muttered. No species would go to such extremes. No other species is human, Reed replied. We evolved as persistence hunters, Commander. We would chase prey for days, wearing them down, never stopping, never resting. We've turned that evolutionary trait into a military doctrine. We call it the long hunt. We don't need to defeat you in battle. We just need to make every victory cost you more than you can afford to lose. We need to persist until you break, the sensor officer interrupted urgently. Commander, detecting massive energy buildup from Earth's sun. They're doing something to their own star. Reed's voice continued. You've noticed our solar modifications. Turns out when you weaponize everything, everything includes your star. We've placed devices in solar orbit that can trigger directed solar flares, crude, dangerous, and as likely to kill us as you. But that's the point, isn't it? We're not trying to win, Commander. We're trying to make everyone lose. Xerax felt something he hadn't experienced in his long life, uncertainty. Every species they had conquered had fought to preserve their civilization. Humans seemed willing to destroy theirs just to spite their conquerors. Your scouts are reporting back to your main fleet now, Reed continued. They're telling the Supreme Chancellor about what they've found. And right now the Chancellor is realizing something important. The cost of conquering humanity isn't worth the prize. We have one system. We have primitive technology. We have nothing you need. But defeating us will cost you hundreds of ships, maybe thousands. And even if you win, you'll have to garrison our system forever because the survivors will never stop fighting. We'll teach our children to hate you. We'll spend generations planning revenge. We'll become the wound that never heals, the infection that slowly kills your empire. You're bluffing, Xerax said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Reed asked. Look at your sensors again, Commander. Look at what 12 billion humans accomplished in 3 days. Now imagine what we'll do with 3 years, or 30. We don't need to match your technology. We just need to make conquest more expensive than leaving us alone. And if you don't believe we'll follow through, remember this. We're the species that invented the concept of mutually assured destruction, and then lived under its shadow for decades. We're comfortable with the idea of everyone dying. Are you? The turning tide. The Calexian Third Fleet hung at the edge of the Sol system like predators deciding whether the prey was worth the hunt. For 7 days they observed and calculated. Supreme Chancellor Kyrax had arrived personally, bringing the flagship Eternal Dominion and 300 of the Empire's finest warships. It should have been overwhelming force. Against any other species it would have ended in hours, but humanity wasn't any other species. General Patricia Chen stood in the Earth Defense Command, watching holographic displays showing the alien fleet. Around her, officers from every nation worked in perfect coordination, their old rivalries forgotten in the face of extinction. They're hesitating, observed Colonel Yamamoto, her tactical advisor. We've made them think, Chen nodded. Thinking is good. Thinking means they're not attacking. Every hour they delay, we grow stronger. It was true. Earth's transformation continued at a pace that defied belief. The entire industrial output of the planet had been redirected to war production. Children assembled ammunition in schools. Artists designed camouflage patterns. Musicians composed battle hymns. Athletes trained as soldiers. Every human contributed something, turning Earth into a single unified war machine. But more importantly, humanity was learning. The brief encounter with Commander Xerax's scouts had provided valuable data. Human scientists working around the clock had begun to understand Calexian technology. Not enough to replicate it, but enough to exploit its weaknesses. Dr. James Park, formerly Earth's leading theoretical physicist, now headed the Asymmetric Warfare Division. He addressed the Joint Chiefs via secure connection from his laboratory beneath Geneva. The Calexians rely heavily on energy-based weapons and shields, he explained. Their technology is elegant, sophisticated, and far beyond ours. But that sophistication is also a weakness. Their systems are complex, interconnected, and dependent on precise calibrations. We've developed something we call chaos weapons, devices that don't try to overpower their technology but simply disrupt it randomly. Think of it as throwing sand into a precision watch. How effective? General Chen asked. Against their scouts, we achieved a 30% degradation in shield efficiency using crude electromagnetic pulse variations. With the new modifications, we might reach 50%, maybe 60% if we're lucky. That's not enough to win, someone pointed out. We're not trying to win, Park reminded them. We're trying to make victory too expensive. If they have to use twice as much energy, twice as much ammunition, twice as many ships to defeat us, eventually the mathematics stop working in their favor. On Calexis Prime, Ambassador Reed remained in his cell, but he was far from idle. The Calexians, in their arrogance, hadn't realized that human neural implants, designed for medical purposes, could be repurposed for communication. Reed was in constant contact with Earth, serving as humanity's eyes within the enemy stronghold. He watched as doubt spread through the Empire. The other subjugated species had taken notice of humanity's defiance. Whispers spread through the station. If humans with their primitive technology could make the Empire hesitate, what could other species do if they united? The Supreme Chancellor summoned Reed to the throne room. The massive crystalline being's form flickered with agitation. "Your species is insane," the Chancellor declared. "You would destroy your own world rather than submit?" Reed stood calmly before the throne. "We've had a saying for centuries, Chancellor. Give me liberty or give me death. We meant it then. We mean it now. You cannot defeat us. Your weapons are primitive. Your ships are slow. Your bodies are fragile." "All true," Reed agreed. "But you're missing the point. We don't need to defeat you. We just need to hurt you enough that others see you can be hurt. How many of your subject species are watching this? How many are seeing the mighty Calexian Empire hesitate before a single primitive world?" The Chancellor's form pulsed with anger. "They would not dare rebel." "Not alone," Reed said. "But humans have another saying. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Right now our signals are reaching every subjugated world. We're sharing our tactics, our strategies, our willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom. We're teaching them that your empire isn't invincible, it's just big." Before the Chancellor could respond, alerts began flashing throughout the throne room. Reports flooded in from across the Empire. Small rebellions had erupted on 17 worlds simultaneously. They were minor, barely worth noting individually. "But they were coordinated. You did this," the Chancellor accused. "No," Reed replied. "You did this. You created an empire built on fear. But fear only works as long as you seem invincible. The moment someone stands up to the bully, others find their courage." Meanwhile, in the Sol system, the standoff continued. Then on the 8th day, a single human ship emerged from behind Earth's moon. It was small, barely 100 meters long, cobbled together from civilian components and military hardware. It accelerated toward the Calexian fleet. Commander Xerax watched in disbelief. "One ship? They send one ship against 300? The human vessel broadcast on all frequencies. The voice was young, female, determined. "This is Captain Lisa Park of the Earthship Defiance. I carry a message for the Calexian Empire." "Destroy it," Xerax ordered. But before his ships could fire, the Defiance exploded. Not from Calexian weapons, but from within. The explosion was strange. Not the clean detonation of antimatter or the bright flash of fusion. It was chaotic, spreading in patterns that made no sense, releasing energies that shouldn't exist together. "What was that?" the Supreme Chancellor demanded. The science officer's form flickered with confusion. "Unknown supremacy." The explosion released conventional energy, but also other things. Exotic particles, dimensional fluctuations, quantum uncertainties amplified beyond normal parameters. It's as if they deliberately created a chaotic event. Damage? None supremacy, but our shields are adapting strangely. They're trying to compensate for the chaotic energies, but it's causing system-wide fluctuations. If there were more such explosions, another ship emerged from Earth, then another, then dozens, then hundreds, all small, all primitive, all on collision courses with the Calexian fleet. The Chancellor's voice echoed through the fleet. "Destroy them all. Don't let them get close." The Calexian fleet opened fire. Beams of coherent energy lashed out. destroying human ships by the score. But there were so many and they came from all directions. Some were manned, some were drones, some were literally asteroids with engines strapped to them. And when they didn't die cleanly. Each explosion was different, chaotic, unpredictable, forcing Calexian systems to constantly readjust. It was like trying to conduct a symphony while someone randomly played noise at maximum volume. 10% of the human ships got through when they detonated against Calexian shields. The chaos they released didn't destroy the ships, but it did something worse. It made their advanced systems inefficient. Shields that should have been impervious flickered. Weapons that never missed suddenly couldn't target accurately. Engines that could fold space stuttered and failed. Pull back, the Chancellor ordered. Regroup outside the system. But as the fleet began to withdraw, humanity played its next card. The solar flare devices Reed had mentioned activated. The sun, Earth's life-giving star, turned into a weapon. Directed solar flares, precisely aimed, washed over the retreating fleet. Not powerful enough to destroy, but enough to add more chaos to already compromised systems. Several Calexian ships collided as their navigation systems failed. Others found themselves dead in space as engines shut down. The ordered retreat became a stumbling rout. From his cell, Reed watched the tactical displays the Calexians hadn't realized he could access. He spoke into the quantum transmitter humanity had hidden in his dental filling. General Chen, Phase 3 is ready. Chen's voice came back immediately. Understood, Ambassador. Initiating the long hunt. As the Calexian fleet regrouped beyond Pluto's orbit, human ships began to emerge from hiding places throughout the system. Not warships, but converted civilian vessels, cargo haulers with weapons welded to their hulls. Passenger liners turned into troop transports. Mining ships carrying nuclear warheads instead of ore. They didn't attack directly. Instead, they shadowed the Calexian fleet, staying just out of effective weapons range, launching occasional long-range attacks that did little damage but forced constant vigilance. They were persistence hunters wearing down their prey. The Supreme Chancellor watched in frustrated rage as his perfect fleet was slowly, methodically harassed by ships that shouldn't even be spaceworthy. Why don't they engage properly? The Chancellor demanded. Commander Zarak studied the patterns. Because they don't need to, Supremacy. They're not trying to defeat us. They're trying to exhaust us. Our crews haven't rested in days. Our systems are running constant diagnostics trying to compensate for their chaos weapons. Our energy reserves are depleting faster than calculated. They're wearing us down. We could destroy their world with a single concentrated bombardment, the Chancellor said. Yes, Zerax agreed. But would that stop them? The ships harassing us aren't coming from Earth anymore. They're coming from Mars, from the asteroid belt, from moons we didn't even know were inhabited. They've dispersed throughout their system. Destroying Earth would only make them more determined. The Chancellor's form dimmed with realization. They never intended to defeat us in battle. No, Supremacy. They intended to make battle irrelevant, to make victory indistinguishable from defeat. The New Order 3 months into what historians would later call the Persistence War. The Calexian Empire found itself in a position it had never experienced, negotiating from weakness. Not because they had lost, but because winning had become meaningless. The statistics were damning. To fully subjugate the Sol system would require an estimated 60% of the Empire's total fleet. Maintaining control would require a permanent garrison of 30%. The resources needed would bankrupt 17 sectors. And for what? One system, 12 billion humans who would never stop fighting. But worse than the mathematics was the inspiration. Across the Empire, subjugated species had begun their own resistance movements. They hadn't adopted human tactics entirely. Most lacked humanity's peculiar combination of stubbornness and creativity. But they had adopted human spirit. The idea that defeat wasn't inevitable, that empires could bleed. Ambassador Reed stood in the Grand Assembly Hall on Calexis Prime once again. But this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood representatives from 19 species, all part of the newly formed Alliance of Free Worlds. The transformation of the galaxy's political structure had taken only 3 months, but it had been 3 months that changed everything. The Supreme Chancellor's form was noticeably dimmer than before, the constant stress having taken its toll even on the crystalline being's ancient physiology. The terms you propose are unacceptable, the Chancellor stated. But the words lacked the former authority. Reed stepped forward. They're not our terms alone, Chancellor. They're the terms of every species that has decided freedom is worth fighting for. The Empire will withdraw from all systems colonized within the last 1,000 years. Self-governance will be restored to all species. Trade will be voluntary, not compulsory, and humanity will serve as guarantor of the peace. Humanity? Commander Xerax's form flared with indignation. A species that barely controls one system would guarantee galactic peace? Yes, Reed replied simply. Because we've proven something important. We've proven that technological superiority isn't the only form of strength. We've shown that determination, creativity, and the willingness to sacrifice everything can overcome any advantage. We've demonstrated that an empire built on fear can be brought down by those who refuse to be afraid. The Varian representative, a serpentine being whose species had been subjugated for 3 millennia, spoke for the first time in the assembly. The humans taught us something we had forgotten. They taught us that survival isn't about living. It's about living free. They showed us that even the smallest species can wound the mightiest empire if they're willing to pay the price. And, Reed added, we've shown that we're willing to teach others. The defensive technologies we've developed, the chaos weapons, the persistence tactics, we're sharing them with every member of the Alliance. Imagine, Chancellor, not one species like humanity, but dozens, all armed with the knowledge that your empire can be resisted, all willing to make conquest too expensive to pursue. The Chancellor looked around the assembly. For 12,000 years, this hall had been filled with subjects and slaves. Now it was filled with equals, or at least those who demanded to be treated as equals. You would destroy the order that has maintained peace for millennia, the Chancellor said. No, Reed responded. We're creating a new order. One based on mutual respect rather than domination. On cooperation rather than subjugation. The Galaxian Empire doesn't have to end, Chancellor. It can transform. It can become the Galaxian Federation, first among equals rather than master of slaves. General Chen's voice came through Reed's implant. Ambassador, the fleet is ready. Reed nodded slightly, then addressed the Chancellor again. You have 1 hour to decide, Chancellor. Accept the terms or face continued resistance from an alliance that grows stronger every day. But know this, if you choose war, it won't be like before. Humanity has spent these 3 months teaching our allies everything we know about asymmetric warfare. We've helped them identify their own strengths, their own ways of fighting that you're not prepared for. The Varians have learned to use their shape-shifting abilities for infiltration. The Thendrak have weaponized their hive-mind coordination. The Melody have turned their sonic abilities into weapons that shatter crystalline structures. The threat was clear. The Chancellor's form flickered through several colors, the Galaxian equivalent of deep thought. Commander Xerax spoke quietly to his leader. Supremacy, our analysis suggests that continued conflict will result in the Empire's dissolution within 2 years. If we accept these terms, we remain a major power, just not the only power. The Chancellor was silent for a long moment. Then, in a gesture that hadn't been seen in 12 millennia, the massive crystalline being lowered itself to the same level as the other species' representatives. We accept the terms. The assembly erupted, not in laughter or mockery, but in celebration. Species that had been enemies for millennia suddenly found themselves allies. The galaxy had changed in a fundamental way, and at the center of it all stood an elderly human who had refused to surrender. 6 months later, Reed stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, the new headquarters of the Alliance of Free Worlds. The station orbited Earth, a deliberate choice to honor the species that had sparked the revolution. Below, his home planet continued its transformation, but now, instead of weapons, it produced tools for peace. The factories that had churned out chaos weapons now manufactured medical equipment for worlds recovering from millennia of exploitation. General Chen joined him at the viewport. She had traded her military uniform for the simple robes of an alliance coordinator, but her bearing remained that of a warrior. Any regrets, Ambassador? She asked. Reed considered the question. We revealed ourselves to the galaxy, showed them what humans are capable of when pushed. Some species fear us now, but more respect us, Chen pointed out. The Galaxians aren't the only ones who learned something. We learned that we don't have to be the monsters of our past. We can be the guardians of the future. A young aide approached them. Ambassador Reed, Coordinator Chen, the Chancellor has arrived for the technology exchange ceremony. They made their way to the ceremony hall. where the Supreme Chancellor waited with a delegation of Calexian scientists. As part of the peace agreement, species were sharing their knowledge freely, advancing the entire galaxy's technological development by centuries. Reed watched as human scientists demonstrated their chaos weapons to Calexian engineers, who in turn shared their energy manipulation techniques. The exchange was sometimes tense, trust took time to build, but it was happening. "The humans' approach is inelegant," a Calexian scientist commented, examining a chaos weapon, but effective in its crudeness. Dr. Park, who had led humanity's weapons development, laughed. "That's the most polite way anyone's ever called us primitive. But you're right. We never had the luxury of elegance. We had to work with what we had." The Supreme Chancellor approached Reed during a break in the proceedings. Even diminished from its former glory, the crystalline being still towered over the human. "I have a question, Ambassador," the Chancellor said quietly. "Were you truly prepared to destroy your own species to deny us victory?" Reed met the Chancellor's multifaceted gaze. "Every human child learns about something called the Masada complex. It comes from an ancient fortress where a small group chose death over slavery. For 2,000 years, it's been part of our cultural DNA. So yes, Chancellor, we would have destroyed ourselves rather than submit. But more importantly, you believed we would, and that belief was enough." "You were bluffing?" "No," Reed said. "We were absolutely prepared to follow through. But we were also counting on you being rational enough not to force us to. The best weapon is the one you never have to use." The Chancellor's form shifted. What Reed had learned was a sign of contemplation. "You turned weakness into strength, desperation into determination. You made the unthinkable thinkable. It should not have worked. But it did," Reed replied, "because you'd forgotten something in your 12,000 years of dominance. You'd forgotten that power isn't just about strength, it's about will. And humans, for all our flaws, have never lacked will." Captain Lisa Park approached them. She had survived the war, one of the few kamikaze pilots who had been recovered after their ships were disabled rather than destroyed. She now served as Earth's liaison to the younger species joining the Alliance. "Ambassador, we're receiving reports from the frontier worlds. 17 more species have applied to join the Alliance. They're citing humanity's example as their inspiration." Reed nodded, but his expression was thoughtful rather than triumphant. "We need to be careful. We've shown the galaxy that resistance is possible, but we've also shown them total war. That's not a gift to be given lightly." The Chancellor made a sound that might have been agreement. "You've unleashed something that cannot be controlled, Ambassador. Ideas are more dangerous than weapons." "Yes," Reed agreed. "But sometimes the most dangerous idea is also the most necessary one. The idea that freedom is worth any price, that dignity is worth dying for, that even the smallest voice deserves to be heard." As the ceremony continued, Reed found himself approached by representatives from various species, all wanting to understand humanity better. The Varians wanted to know how humans maintained unity despite their differences. The Thendrak were fascinated by human creativity in the face of limitation. The Melody wanted to understand human music, which they found chaotic but strangely moving. To each, Reed gave the same message: "We're not special. We're not superior. We're just stubborn. We refuse to accept that something is impossible until we've tried everything, and then we try a few more things just to be sure. Any species can do what we did. You just have to be willing to pay the price." Later, as the station's artificial day cycle dimmed toward evening, Reed found himself alone with General Chen in the human delegation's quarters. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Chen asked. "We've changed the entire galaxy, upset a balance that existed for millennia." Reed poured himself a glass of water, real water from Earth, not recycled station fluid. The balance was built on oppression. It needed to be upset. "But you're right to be concerned. We've given every species in the galaxy the knowledge of how to fight asymmetric warfare, how to turn weakness into strength, how to make victory too expensive to achieve. That could lead to chaos. Or it could lead to real peace," Reed countered. "When everyone knows that war is too expensive, diplomacy becomes the only option. When every species can defend itself, conquest becomes impossible. We've created a galaxy where cooperation is more profitable than domination." Chen raised her own glass. "To humanity, then. The species too stubborn to know when it's beaten?" Reed clinked his glass against hers. "To humanity. The species that turned being backed into a corner into a military doctrine. Outside the viewport, ships from dozens of species worked together to build new stations, new trade routes, new possibilities. The galaxy had changed, and at its heart was the lesson humanity had taught. Sometimes the weak could defeat the strong, not by becoming strong themselves, but by changing the rules of the game entirely. The Supreme Chancellor had been right about one thing. Ideas were more dangerous than weapons. And humanity had given the galaxy the most dangerous idea of all, that freedom was not granted by the powerful but taken by the determined. As Reed prepared to retire for the night, his aide brought him one final message. It was from Earth, from a classroom where human children were learning about the war. A young girl had asked her teacher why humans had been willing to destroy everything rather than surrender. The teacher's response, recorded and sent to Reed, was simple. Because some things are worth more than life. Freedom is one of them, and sometimes the only way to win is to make sure everyone loses. But the real victory isn't in the fighting, it's in making sure you never have to fight that way again. Reed smiled at the wisdom in those words. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Humanity had proven it could destroy. Now it had to prove it could build. It had shown it could resist. Now it had to show it could lead. The alliance of free worlds was young, fragile, held together more by fear of returning to the old ways than by trust in the new. But it was a start, and if there was one thing humans were good at, it was taking a small chance and turning it into an impossible victory. The galaxy had learned that humans were dangerous when cornered. Now it would learn that they were even more remarkable when given the freedom to thrive. The persistence that had made them terrifying in war would make them invaluable in peace. The creativity that had spawned chaos weapons would now spawn solutions to problems thought unsolvable. The determination that had refused surrender would now refuse to let the alliance fail. Ambassador Marcus Reed, the old human who had stood alone before the might of an empire and refused to bow, closed his eyes and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Not in victory, but in survival. Not in conquest, but in freedom. Humanity had given the galaxy war. Now it would give it something better, hope. The story of humanity's place in the galaxy had just begun, and it would be written not in the language of conquest, but in the vocabulary of cooperation. The empire that had ruled through fear had fallen to a species that ruled through example, and in the end that example would prove more lasting than any empire. As the lights dimmed on Harmony Station, representatives from 100 worlds worked through the night, building a future that none of them could have imagined just 1 year before. At the center of it all was the lesson humanity had taught. When faced with annihilation, don't just fight back. Change the game entirely. The galaxy would never be the same. And somewhere in his cell-turned guest quarters on Calexis Prime, where he had chosen to stay as a symbol of reconciliation, Ambassador Reed smiled. Humanity had done more than survive. It had transformed the very nature of power in the galaxy. The weak had not become strong. They had made strength irrelevant, and that more than any weapon was humanity's greatest gift to the stars.